their way to their seats, that would be awesome. We're going to get started shortly. Come on, come on, come on. All right, you guys, it's 9 o'clock, so if everybody can grab their seat, we're going to get started and work into our keynote speech. Again, welcome to the 2022 APA Conference in Vail. I'm Joni Marsh, your current APA Colorado president, and I'm going to first and foremost thank I'm going to thank all of our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't really be able to put on the type of conference that we're able to put on. So first and foremost, our partner sponsor, ZipFlow, and you'll hear from Jason here in a little bit. Our platinum sponsor, Baseline Engineering. The reception sponsor, Tischler Bice. Our Wi-Fi sponsor, Tyler Technologies. And we have a bunch of gold sponsors. Thank you very much. They include Ayers & Associates, Bohannon Houston, Clarion, Cushing Terrell, DTJ Design, EPS, Felsberg Holt and Ulevig, Granicus, bang the table, JS Designs, Logan Simpson, Oracle, Oz Architecture, the UC Denver MERP program, and Wilson & Associates. So thank you very much as a gold sponsor. For silver sponsors, we have AECOM, MIG, Otten Johnson, Puma, Stan Clausen & Associates, TEI Planning and Engineering, Colorado Geological Survey, and Valerian LLC. And our small business sponsors this year, Community Planning Strategies LLC, Egret and Ox Planning LLC, Lakeside Consultants, MTJ Roundabout Engineering, Plan Tool LLC, Root Policy, and Urban Landscapes LLC. So thank you again to all of our sponsors for helping us put together a great conference for you. And then we also have many exhibitors out in the hallway as well as sponsors. So please stop by, speak with them, say thank you. And again, welcome to our keynote this morning. We're going to start out, and I'm going to hand it off to Jason Thompson with ZipFlow, and he's going to do a short presentation. And then Camille, who is our APAS student president, will introduce our keynote today, Lori Pace. Jason?
All right. Good morning. My name is Jason Thompson. I'm a civil engineer, and I have 20 years of experience and work with professionals like you every day. I am here to introduce ZipFlow. Chances are you have seen or heard of permitting software, but it mostly focuses on simple building permit processes and doesn't help very much with land use type permitting. Land use is very complex, has lots of steps, lots of conditions, lots of exceptions, and each project is different. It is very hard to keep track of the process for both the city and the applicant. ZipFlow makes it easy, obvious, and automated. It shows the whole process in a linear progression of steps that is specific to each project. This is the Domino's Pizza Tracker. It was introduced by Domino's to reduce the number of people calling to find out the status of their pizza. It worked like a charm, and customers absolutely love being able to track their pizza being made and delivered. ZipFlow does the same thing for permitting. Both the city and the applicant always know the steps and the status for each project. We configure each permit type to how your jurisdiction does things. The software molds to your jurisdiction, not the other way around. We have a lot of different step types. This is a form step. We can configure these to match any existing forms you have. However, ZipFlow forms can do a lot more. We have text fields, date pickers, map location pickers, participants, document uploads, check boxes, and signature fields. Fields can be required or optional. These forms will dramatically cut down on incomplete and incorrect applications. Forms can be completely dynamic. For example, if the applicant checks this box, additional fields show up associated with that item. We can use your jurisdiction's GIS data to autofill forms for applicants. For example, when an applicant picks or drops a pin on this map where they want a driveway on a state road, it uses GIS data to pre-fill the state route ID milepost marker, access category, and posted speed limit automatically. Without this, the applicant had to go to 5 different websites to collect the information themselves, and they often got it wrong. As another example, this county has sensitive areas that require additional permitting. If the applicant selects a parcel that intersects a floodplain, it will automatically adjust the process to include a floodplain permit. This is a review step. You can assign people to review each document uploaded and keep track of their review status. We have an in-browser review tool. No need to download files or use external software like Bluebeam. Everyone can review the same document at the same time. No need to compile comments from different reviewers. You can use these tools to mark up the drawing right here. Comments associated with annotations appear on the left side. If the applicant has questions, you can have conversations back and forth in line about each individual comment. This automatically creates an organized paper trail. When the applicant submits changes, you can compare the old versus new side by side to make sure they addressed your comments exactly as you wanted. Clicking on the comment pans and zooms to the annotation so you don't have to, thus making review organized and effortless. We have a fee step. These fees can be calculated automatically based on information in your forms. People can pay online, by phone, or however you'd like. This is a document generation step. We can generate documents of any kind that you wish. For example, certificates of occupancy and building permits. This is an inspection step for infrastructure inspections, such as roadways and pipes, and etc. Inspectors can create a report for each site plan made, or each site visit made to document what is seen and inspected. We also have an inspection step for building permits. This is the new Mayflower Ski Resort near Park City, Utah. It will have 4 giant hotels, hundreds of residences, and 5 ski lifts. The permits for this jurisdiction are very complex and unique. All permits are handled with ZipFlow. If you want to talk to someone about ZipFlow, they would be more than happy to share their experiences with you. Let us know and we can provide their contact information. Unfortunately for Colorado, Utah will have one more reason to entice travelers to come and enjoy the greatest snow on earth. Personally, I don't know if it's the greatest snow because that's the only snow I've ever experienced. This is my son, who is almost as tall as me, enjoying 3 feet of the most amazing, fantastic powder you could imagine. This is an example of a process for a site plan. The steps in this process can be adjusted dynamically. For example, when there are conditions that require a DRC or a board meeting, these steps are added dynamically to the process. So we really can handle any process that you have. So how does an applicant get started? They fill out a project inquiry, where they add info about themselves and anyone who is participating. They give it a name and describe what they want to do. They select the parcels they want to work with. Then you can review all the info they provided and choose what process they need to follow. We can and do handle anything from simple permits, simple sign permits, to the most complex months-long subdivision. This means applicants will never fill out the wrong form again. We also have an amazing support team. Anytime you have questions or issues, we usually respond within 30 minutes. I've just scratched the surface. ZipFlow is affordable for jurisdictions of all sizes. If you want to learn more, come talk to me. I'll be in the exhibit hall. You can also go to zipflow.com and schedule a live demo. Thank you for your time. See if I can get this down off your screen here.
Hello, everyone. Now it's time for the main event. Thank you, Jason. We're here for the keynote address, and we're lucky to be joined by Lori Pace. For myself, again, I'm Camille Paul, the CU Denver APAS Student Chapter President. So to introduce Lori, she began speaking and educating in real estate industry 5 years ago, really about the value of diversity of difference in real estate. Her degree is in environmental design with an emphasis on urban planning. She became a realtor in 2010 and is a professional speaker and trainer. She has been analyzing organizations and coaching leaders and industry partners on how to expand their network and net worth through the lens of Black, Indigenous people of color. Lori has received awards and is recognized in several publications for her efforts, including Business and Philanthropy, serving on many boards in various capacities over roles over the last 25 years. These industries include architecture, urban planning, residential commercial real estate, all culminating in diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies for all industries. Lori launched her rocket as the eager Black woman on a TEDx stage and has not stopped talking about equity in the fast-changing pace of the post-pandemic world by helping organizations and leaders invest in inclusion initiatives. She leverages her firsthand professional and personal experiences to help build multicultural momentum and mindset with a glass-full approach. She inspires audiences as a keynote speaker and then stops talking about change and takes action with people of different heritages, ready to grow in an engaging, entertaining, and safe environment from workshops to workplaces. Please help me introduce Lori Pace.
I have my reading glasses because I'm that age. Talking to planners, but not urban planners. So I could not be more thrilled to be here because you're my tribe. So I'm thrilled to be here. We're going to start off the day doing a little exercise, and we're going to work into the presentation. I have 1,017 slides, and we're not going to use all of them. I'm going to go with the feel of the room because I just like to feel the vibe of it. But first, we're going to take a selfie. All right, so really big. I totally had the wrong way. Hold on. Okay, now we got it. Ooh, that was my Britney moment. So for now, let's start off with this. If you identify yourself as being Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, please stand. Hey. Please remain standing. Girl, stand up. Now, this is the best part. We're about to have the most amazing, loud pep rally ever. Will you please join me in clapping and cheering for the people that are standing? Woo! Yes. Woo. Thank you. I have always wanted to do that. You can sit down now. And the reason being is that for so many years I was one of few. And sometimes people say, well, they're colorblind. We already know the answer about that. I'm not going to get into implicit bias and all those things, but sometimes people walk in this room who are in the minority only by number, and they feel as though maybe somebody didn't notice. So today, we celebrate those that stood, and for the rest of you, next year, bring a friend that looks like them. And that will be your first action step for making sure that we not only change the demographics of this room, but we have the perspective of so many others. So in saying that, many of you know exactly what it feels like to be celebrated, and you also know what it feels like to be invisible. Regardless of your heritage or background, you've all had that experience at some point. And so when saying that, if you remember what that feels like, to know that somebody actually noticed you, somebody's cheering you on, you feel like it's your superpower. So when you have that superpower, you can do amazing things. You can do things that you didn't think you could do because you know somebody has your back. And so today, we have each other's back. We're doing this all together. So, if somebody was sitting down, please stand up if you feel like you know what it's like to be invisible when you're part of the majority. Anyone brave enough to do it? Yes. We're celebrating you too. If you'll just round applause and clap really loud. Thank you. And the reason why I do that, because after doing this for many years, I've been told, well, what about us? Does that mean that I'm not as important anymore? Not at all. It just means that we took some time to do something a little different. So we are starting with the end in mind, and I will start off by saying that last year, This topic was called diversity, equity, inclusion. It's changed. It's now equity, diversity, and inclusion. And next year, it'll probably be something else, and the year after that, it'll be something else. And right now, many people are experiencing diversity fatigue. That's a real thing. It's when you talk about something so much, kind of like I'm gonna lose weight, I'm gonna get on that treadmill, I'm gonna get on that Peloton, and you talk about it so much, you start getting tired about talking about it because you actually haven't taken any action. Until you start taking action and you experience change, you just get tired of talking about it. So we are not going to talk about it much today. We're gonna get involved, we're gonna ask questions, and you're in a safe place to ask whatever you want. So if you've heard somebody say before, looking at your table, who do you spend most of your time with? And you realize, wait, I don't have that person that I could say, but my best friend's black. Today I'm your best friend. So now you too could say, my best friend's black. But most importantly, what I want you to know is that this journey that we're going on today is very intentional. For many, many years, I sat in rooms, hearing things, seeing things, and realizing that I was raised in a way where being different was my superpower. I never felt ashamed, I never felt embarrassed. I used that to my benefit. And today we're gonna do exactly that. I'm gonna start off with a video here. Hopefully, IT got this working for us.
Well, there's been a lot of controversy in Stapleton over the past month.
First, a 14-year-old boy murdered, then racist graffiti discovered on a bridge, and then that naming controversy.
And today, the neighborhood gathered to celebrate Stapleton's diversity and bring it closer together. Denver 7's Sean Toll has the story.
Volleyball, bags, meat on the grill, and lots of people. All ingredients for a perfect Labor Day picnic.
I'm so excited because I don't know any of them.
People in this Stapleton neighborhood who came want to get to know each other because this neighborhood has been through a lot lately.
August was a really rough month on so many levels.
It started with a 14-year-old boy being murdered nearby.
Shortly thereafter, there was some graffiti under this bridge over here with the letters KKK. Didn't mean kindness.
On top of that, the Stapleton name controversy.
People often say Stapleton's not very diverse, and it is more diverse than people realize, and this is an example of how diverse it is.
Diversity and inclusion is why Lori Pace wants her neighborhood to grow together, and why she organized a picnic in Prairie Meadows Park this afternoon.
The response of this to what happened all the way across the board is the right response to.
I just want people to see what this looks like and have it imprinted in their brain. If this is the image that they're gonna know about this park, that's it.
And there's a lot of people here who believe the same thing.
This is why we moved here. This is specifically why we wanted to move to Stapleton 11 years ago.
They want to move forward in a positive way, so their kids are not afraid of the park.
This park is going to have good memories if I can help it.
Good memories and a fresh start with the turn of a calendar.
September is gonna be our month now.
And those in attendance hope for many more after that.
I'm just glad that we're here and that by the end of this day, we're gonna be neighbors and not just souls walking by.
Sean Toll, Denver 7.
Well, there's been a lot of controversy in Stapleton over the past month.
First, a 14-year-old boy.
Now I can. Maybe. Perfect. Just like we planned. And then the clicker? Wonderful. So I wanted to share that video with you. Are most of you in here from Colorado? I'm going to make some assumptions. If you're not, raise your hand. Whatever. The reason I'm asking is some of you may be familiar with the neighborhood Stapleton. Stapleton is in northeast Denver. It now has a new name called Central Park. That name came about by a vote by the neighbors. It was very, very controversial, but now it's called Central Park. So sometimes, like Prince, we say the neighborhood formerly known as Stapleton. This happens to be my home, and I'm going to do a presentation today, not based on case study, but literally sharing my story. Part of sharing my story is to really get down into what it feels like to be in my shoes and have you experience that. I have one eye that always waters. I'm not emotional. It just always waters. But it is an emotional topic for me. And the reason being is I started an organization in the neighborhood because my kids always felt that they were the only ones in the neighborhood that looked like them. Even though they saw people occasionally, we didn't know who lived there versus who was visiting. I had the privilege and benefit of working in urban planning in an early age by having a mentor who worked with me, and I became her intern. Not by accident, completely intentional. The reason I'm sharing this is I was at CU Boulder in environmental design, and I was loving the opportunity to become an architect, just like my daddy. It was gonna be his legacy. And somewhere along the line, I realized I liked people more than computers, and Kat and I did not get along. So from there, I decided I wanted to be with the people, and I realized urban planning was about the people. So I was so thrilled. I went to a conference for an organization called the National Association of Minority Architects. And at this conference, we went to this place called Cabrini Greens. And it was this tall building that looked like caged animals, which happened to be people living in this building. And I had never seen anything like it. And I was perplexed. And I thought, who as an urban planner would design this and expect people to live in this and have a family and not even own the property? It didn't make any sense to me. When I came back, I had learned a lot of things that I wanted to share with my professor. One of them was, did you know a black man designed Washington, D.C.? I was so thrilled because now the student was becoming the teacher. And he looked at me. I know what he wanted to say was child please. But what he said was he actually was not an architect or a planner. He was a slave. He was an apprentice. And I said, no, that's not what I learned. We went back and forth, and when it was all said and done, not only was this man an architect, he was in astrology, he was a scientist, he had many other titles, but he wasn't allowed to keep those titles. I have a whole TED Talk on titles. We're not going there today. The titles that I'm talking about aren't just names. The titles I'm talking about is real estate titles. But what was so sad about this moment, and at the time I'm sure he thought he was helping me, he said, honey, it's gonna be really difficult for you to make it not only as an architect, an urban planner, because there's not many people like you. And projects like Cabrini Green aren't here in Colorado, so you don't have to worry about it. In fact, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. He said, I'm trying to protect you because I think this is gonna be a hard road for you. Now I have a 19-year-old now, and she said, don't you wanna go back and say thank you to that professor? That is not at all what I was thinking, whatsoever. But she has now become my teacher because she's right about that. He actually thought he was protecting me from going through the heartache of having the exact discussion we had that day about who was right versus wrong. I was 6 weeks from graduating, and I was writing my thesis on the black man that designed Washington, D.C. And he said, if you don't change this, you won't graduate. Now, I'm from Jamaica. We graduate. In fact, I was on a mission to graduate. We went back and forth for a while, went all the way up the chain to the president, ombudsman office, you name it, and I was told that I would have to drop the class, which means I wouldn't graduate. This was my first chance to learn about negotiating. I didn't want to be a troublemaker, but I knew that I worked 4 years, going on my 5th, and that I wanted to graduate. So we came up with a plan B. This has been a secret for many years, and now I'm outing it. The plan B was to take a class at CU Denver to make up for this credit. And that class was Real Estate 101. And I thought, why in the world am I learning about real estate? I'm gonna be an urban planner. This doesn't make any sense. I was really annoyed by this, but I ended up taking the class, and through this class I realized that real estate is the other side of urban planning, the other side of architecture, real estate development. All this to say is that I learned a lot, and I thought, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. But more importantly than what I learned while I was there, I learned about some trailblazers that were women who were not only designing Denver, they were redesigning historic buildings. Many of you may know of these women. Susan Powers and Dana Crawford were these two trailblazing women that from afar I thought one day. And Susan Powers took me under her wing. Okay, let me rephrase that. I said, excuse me, ma'am, can I be your intern? She said, we don't have interns at Denver Urban Renewal Authority. We don't have a budget. It's a city agency. Sound familiar? I said, okay. So can I be your intern? So I kept on bugging her. So finally, she said, you can be my intern. So I came to be her intern, and then eventually the first project that I had was working on a neighborhood called Stapleton. At the time, it was an airport, and we were transitioning it to a neighborhood. And it was a plan-developed neighborhood. It was all the stuff that I learned about. I was so thrilled and excited. Fast forward 35 years later, I live in the neighborhood, and all the things that we did, the parks, the pools, everything, the community areas, it was perfect. And I thought, who would ever have their children live here? There used to be an airport here. It's gonna be green kids. I live there. It's like Disneyland for adults and for children, because it has all the things that you read about. There have been awards, but one thing that was never addressed, and I actually never thought to ask the question, what is the dynamics of bringing restricted income, $1 million homes, $3 million homes, renters, buyers, sellers, when you bring them all together and you now have people that come from different backgrounds, have different resources, and you have what some would call utopia, but what was happening is people were having conversations about the name of the neighborhood, because the neighborhood happened to be named by a man who was known to be affiliated with the KKK. Now, at this point in my life, I've never had an experience directly with the KKK. There was this one time when I was doing the back road from Boulder to CSU because I wanted to have more fun there, and I did see white sheets in the dark, and we drove all the way home with our lights off because we didn't want to be seen. I try to forget that incident, and then all of a sudden, 35 years later, I found out that the letters KKK were on a bridge 3 blocks from my home. I was in shock. I didn't even know how to have this conversation with my kids because you don't often run into the KKK. You learn about it in school. All of that to say is, at the time, I'd started this organization to bring families together, because what I used to do is I'd run up to people, and if they were black, I'd say, "Do you live here?" And my kids would say, "Would you stop doing that?" And I'd say, "Do you live here?" "Latino, do you live here?" I'd ask anybody that looked different, and my kids said, "Please just stop." So I created this organization for black families to find each other. And then I got the call. I know this isn't the right thing. Now let me go back. It's a Facebook page. I barely know how to use Facebook. So I didn't know how I was gonna bring people and screen and what have you, and it started to happen organically. A family called me and said, "Well, I'm a white mother, and I have an Asian child. Can you help me find another family like this?" Then I got another call. "We're a Jewish family. There is the Christmas lighting ceremony every year, but what about our traditions? We would like to see other families come together, but it's really hard to find these families with so many people there." So what was once Soulfully Stapleton became Soulfully Central Park, which now is a Facebook group that I barely manage because I still don't know what I'm doing with it, but it has grown organically to almost 500 families and individuals. It includes people that would consider themselves underrepresented. Why does this matter to you? When it came time to change the name of the neighborhood, I didn't want to change the name because that's how people found us. They would put in Latina Stapleton, Black Stapleton, Gay Stapleton, non-binary Stapleton. And if I changed the name, how would we find each other? So we have events, we did all these wonderful things, and so all of a sudden, I was considered the sellout. If you haven't noticed, you can't tell on the phone if I'm black or white. So my entire life I was told, "You're not black enough, you're not white enough." I had this thought that I wasn't enough of something, and here it was happening again as a grown woman. What I realized at that point was that it didn't matter what the name was. I enjoyed that tribe, the same experience that we're having here today when you're with your people. But then I was getting criticism. "Well, now you're being exclusive. You're segregating people in the neighborhood." I was like, "You just can't go right." Somebody said being a leader is a burden. This was more than a burden. I was losing sleep. My kids were asking questions. "Well, I thought you were doing this for a good reason." People were saying horrible things. The press was calling. "Why haven't you changed the name of the neighborhood?" I said, "I can't change the name of the neighborhood until it's official." When it officially happened, it was all over the news that we changed the name, so now we're Soulfully Central Park. So when a young man was murdered near the neighborhood, really in the neighborhood, all of a sudden there was this rise of people being angry because I can't believe this kid was in our neighborhood. The truth is, he went to our high school, and for the first time that year, I would see young black children walking down the street, and I'm thinking, where are these kids coming from? And I'd see them walking about 2 miles because there was a bus stop at the end. Busing is real, it still happens. These kids were coming from Montbello and Green Valley Ranch, a neighborhood that wasn't too far away, and they were coming to the high school. They walked through the neighborhood, looked at all these beautiful homes, and a young man was killed. And all of a sudden, somebody said, "There goes the neighborhood." That was the same thing that was said in the 60s. That meant if you were in a gated community or a community that was created because of redlining, or you were in a green neighborhood, and somebody who looked different moved in, they would say, "There goes the neighborhood." So being the optimistic that I am not an angry black woman. I'm a very eager black woman. And I decided we're going to have a party. We're going to celebrate the good of this neighborhood. We're going to celebrate the fact that this park is not going to be known for the park where somebody was killed, where the letters KKK was, and our kids are afraid to be there. And as a result of it, we had this picnic. And the name changed over time, and that was the beginning of me realizing that sometimes actions do speak louder than words. I've been talking about diversity forever. I finally decided to actually do something about it. And the best part of this story is that the reason I don't know what goes on with the page, because now families get together, they do things together, we are a community, and so much of the community gets involved. The man that spoke at the end had reached out to me and said, "I'd like to participate in your picnic." I'm not one for screening people out, but I was doing this experiment of if somebody said they wanted to join the group, I'd say, "Okay, well, my kid's father grew up in Mississippi." And he said, "Well, what if somebody hurtful gets in the group? How do you let him in?" I didn't want to be the one to police people coming in and out. So this man shows up with ice, hot dogs, food. He's like, "I'm here. I'm the guy that you didn't let in the group. How's that inclusion working?" I felt like such a hypocrite. When it was done, I realized that this man was a Vietnam vet, and he felt comfortable with other cultures because that's what he learned in the military. So he wanted to be part of this picnic. So all of this happened because of taking action. So through this conversation today, the number one message is that you cannot sit here and listen to what implicit bias is, or find out if I like to be called Black or African American. I like to be called Jamaican and Lori. But if you ask me, I'm not offended, because it's about asking the right questions and understanding what resonates with me and what resonates with you. Because people usually don't walk around saying, "Do you like to be called white or Caucasian?" But in my family, I was not allowed to use the word white person. I was supposed to use Caucasian because we were from Jamaica. My kids still are trying to figure out what Caucasian is. As a result of it, you just have to ask more questions. So normally what happens when we have a conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, we go back to those things that make people uncomfortable. We talk about race, we talk about redlining, we talk about all these things, policies, laws, zoning, restrictions, covenants, all the things that our industry created, made law. And in 1968, fair housing happened, and all of a sudden there were protected classes. Now we would question what protected really means, but we're not doing any of that. Today we're going to talk about the real deal. The reality is that neighborhoods are still impacted by what happened with redlining. But that's not going to happen overnight where things just change. It's the activities and what's happening in the neighborhood, who's coming in the neighborhood. When you're sitting at your dinner table, you look around the table, who's at the table with you? Sometimes you have the most incredible conversations during that time. But if you look around the table and everybody looks like you and has the same mindset, chances are you don't understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. So I'm inviting you to get involved and engaged in every area of the communities that you're involved that aren't related to real estate and planning, because it's through that you start to develop relationships. So I got into architecture because of my dad. That professor failed miserably because what he didn't know is that my dad was a black architect. So when he said there weren't many, I knew there was. I grew up with him. So he didn't succeed, but fast forward later, now I'm technically an alumni at CU Denver, and I participate in activities there, but I'm on the board, the advisory board, with two people that were Women for Afar, with Dana Crawford and Susan Powers, who are women who I just wouldn't get away from, because I wanted to learn. They did not ask to be my mentor, I made them my mentor. Mentorship is obviously the way to learn. One thing that is unique about mentorship, it can be a burden. I went to every single meeting, and the question always was, "Who's she?" And Susan Powers said, "She's with me." She said it before. They were saying, "I'm with her." I'd say, "I'm with her." And I would go into city council meetings, and I'd go to the mayor's office, and I'd go to Urban Land, and I'd go everywhere with her. I learned everything about the industry, but she personally took me side by side. 35 years later, she's still my mentor. And we talk about the issues at hand, and we're still having the same conversation. How do we get more people of color in this industry? It's not easy. It's expensive to be in this industry. It doesn't pay a lot all the time. It's hard work. And if you're someone who's been burdened by the experience, not that you lived in a neighborhood where there was renters or owners, but simply by the mere fact that every day that you wake up and you walk into the room, you have to think about how someone's going to perceive you in that moment, and you adjust. I used to have a really great Jamaican accent, and I know at the bar there's Appleton rum, and so if I have enough, it comes back. But I got rid of that accent because kids were making fun of me, and I said, please, I want to sound like American. So I'd go home and I'd practice sounding like an American, and I'd practice, and finally one day I sounded like an American, and somebody said, where are you from? It was my saddest day because I realized I erased a part of who I was, that they didn't see me as Jamaican anymore, and I wanted that identity back. So I've learned to finally just be authentic with who I am and embrace it. Regardless of how I speak or what I say, I am who I am. So one of the things that happened is that my dad went to the School of Architecture at Pratt University, which is in New York. At the time in the 1960s, they'd let one black person in every 4 years, just one. Then they moved it to every 2 years. This is 1967. And he said to me, you will not go to an integrated, or a school that is not integrated. So what I do, I send my daughter to a historical black college. Let me tell you how that's working out. She's never been around that many black people, so she's adjusting. So I know what it's like to be an immigrant, to try to bring people along, and people don't understand or don't want to do anything, or it's complicated. It happens at all different levels, whether you're the only in the room or one of few. But as a result of it, all these things that happened, urban renewal, redlining, all these things that have happened in neighborhoods are impacting every single one of you, regardless of where you lived. And now it's expanded. We are now a global economy. We don't have the opportunity to just focus on our own neighborhood. So we're gonna go through the boring slides really quick, so read them really fast, because for continuing education purposes, these are all the things that are really important. But for the purpose of our conversation, you're just gonna read them really fast. And the reason being is this is my neighborhood here. This is the stuff that actually matters. This neighborhood, literally, if you can see the letters on the wall, says KKK. This was 2 years ago, 2019. Underneath it says FUNIGGER. I've learned that I'm not allowed to say that word, but we are gonna talk about the N word, and we're gonna get really into it. This is not Where's Waldo. This is Where's Lori. This has been my experience most of my professional career in anything related to wealth building, real estate, urban planning. But the N word we're talking about is just neighborhoods, so you can relax. We're not talking about the other N word. But for other companies and organizations, the N word that people always go to is that one word. There's a million N words, but people make that assumption every time. So I love it when I'm talking to bankers and I say, we're gonna talk about net worth, and they get so excited. There's so many N words, but that is that implicit bias that you did the training for, you checked the box, and your organizations made their committees. And most of the people that go to those committees already know what it feels like to be in that committee because they're living it in the world. So I don't really believe in the committees per se. I believe in the commitments that go with it. But the N words, there's so many. But people, everybody in this room automatically knows what N word I'm referring to. But I learned that you can't just leave it like that because people feel uncomfortable, they close it off and they get mad and they start talking about their guilt and they start saying, that was my granddaddy, that wasn't me, I'm not like that, I'm not a racist, all those things. Relax, we're not going there. This is one of the brokerages that I started at. It looks exactly the same. Hello? Okay, the brokerage where I am, after 40 years, I'm still the only black woman. Now let me be crystal clear. It has not been from lack of effort. So I understand why there's not more people of color in this room. It's not easy. There's a lot of reasons why that is. Too many to go through today, but it has not been from lack of effort. But the woman who hired me 10 years ago, and I asked her, why'd you hire me? She still hasn't figured it out because they don't hire rookies. But kind of like I did with my mentors, I'd say, so what's your point? So I joined the brokerage and I've been there, But I left for a moment because I wanted to be around more people like myself. But what I found out is just going into a changed environment, it was all the misfits. It was 2 women who were lesbians that owned a brokerage. We had every misfit, underrepresented person in the industry. But there were so many things that were going on that we were talking about, change and all the things, that a lot of real estate wasn't being sold. So it's not a solution just to recruit, which seems to be the most obvious. So when I said literally bring somebody next year, figure out how to get it paid for, whether it's a sponsor where it comes out of your pocket, or if you just find somebody who happens to be in the hall. I got to meet a Jamaican last night. He brought my bags to the room and he had no idea. I said, have you ever thought about urban planning? So next year, guess who's gonna come? Because literally, having been an immigrant, he gets urban planning. We talked about affordable housing far longer than he probably wanted to. We dissected Summit County, additional dwelling units, the whole thing. All he wanted to know is where did I want to put my bag? But it's something as simple as that, as asking somebody to join you and have a conversation. You'll be surprised what you will learn. So these are the people in my neighborhood that became my friends. We were all strangers prior to a couple years ago. We travel together, we play together, people get married, divorced, all of the things in the neighborhood, but we found our tribe. This was in the early stages. The organization now looks like the Rainbow Coalition, and I cannot tell you all the wonderful things that happened in that organization. This is the boring stuff, but it's important to know. Leadership is what makes change happen in organizations. It doesn't start from the bottom up. It can't. It starts with policies, just like the Fair Housing Act. It has to be the law. It has to be best practices. It has to be the way that you do business. And from that, the rest will follow. But then the next step is, what is your succession plan? Who's coming behind you? Who's going to be the next leaders? How are you feeding into those individuals that are going to be the leaders of tomorrow? Because I will tell you this, because I am raising a Generation Z hippie who doesn't shave anywhere and doesn't use deodorant and is having a hard time in conservative Florida. But she's at a historical black college and she will have therapy at some point. All that to say is I've learned so much about sustainability and the environment because I'm asking her questions, and they will not tolerate sitting in a room where they're one of few, where their voices aren't being heard, regardless if they're talking to you about the fact that you're not recycling, whatever the case may be. They think we screwed it up, and they're on a mission to fix it, and they're not fixing it in just a room. It's a global economy. They are figuring out housing issues globally. So all the things that we talk about in the next couple of days are the same issues that are happening in all the different countries that are rising up, literally. COVID was the example where we all found out we have something in common. The whole world was in quarantine. No one cared if you're black, white, Asian, small, tall, wealthy, not wealthy, disabled, ADD, those are my people. None of it mattered. We all had the same issue, and we were given a gift. We were given the gift of knowing that we have to figure this out together. We all had a chance to see the skies blue. We got a chance to see who was affected by urban planning first, and those who were not as much, because their neighborhood was designed to nurture them. And we even had the unfortunate opportunity of watching a young man lose his breath and yell, "Mama, I can't breathe." By the same token, we also had somebody in a hospital who also couldn't breathe because they couldn't get ventilation. The entire nation stopped breathing for a minute. And in the meanwhile was my golden opportunity for everybody to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to talk about something. I was calling companies who were not talking about the regular stuff. And we were starting to make changes. And then they changed their mission statement, they checked the box, they did all the things, and then they went back to business as usual. So this is the sign you might remember. Anybody remember this? This is a true story. This was a sign put in 5 Points, a historical black neighborhood, which was not always a black neighborhood. Just like all urban planning, it was designed for the wealthy at one point, which then moved to the suburbs. We know what that's called. Then all of a sudden it became segregated, all the things. And then in 2018, Ink Coffee had this sign, and I bet you somebody in marketing got paid a lot of money and thought they were really creative, and they thought, we are investing in this neighborhood. And just like the situation in college, gentrification has a different meaning depending on who you are. If you were the displaced, you don't like the word. If you're the investor, you think that you've influxed money into the community and you have a great coffee shop. It went viral. And I can promise you, the person who created the sign did not mean to hurt anyone. They actually thought they were doing something good. This is what happens when you don't have other people in the room to give you perspective. Nobody in the room knew that gentrification was also a dirty word. It happens to be one that I saw at Cabrini Green years ago. I didn't know what it was called. The word's not going anywhere, the problems aren't going anywhere, the opportunities are on the rise. But this is an example of what happens when you don't invite others in the room, when you don't invite people to the table, and not only invite them to the table, but create leaders who would never let something like this happen. And this person, just like some people's great-grandparents, was not guilty of doing something to create harm, they just didn't know. If you didn't know, now you know. If you listen to rap music, which I don't do a ton of, there's the ending to that song that I can't say here. So after all this happened, on that very next day, in the world that I live, I have two different worlds. This is what a continuing education class looks like in real estate. I have the back of their heads. There's two of us that are people of color. We both happen to sit on the board. That day we were talking about zoning, the elections, legislation, all the things in real estate urban planners talk about. And that very night, at the Blair Caldwell Library in 5 Points, that was the room. This is 2018. This is not a Black Baptist church. There was no singing or dancing. The opposite was being told. We're talking about how are we going to change the neighborhood with different investors so that situation doesn't happen again. The happily ever after story is not that simple. The neighborhood demographics are changing. People have come together to create solutions, but it's a slow process. We have thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of years to undo what has already been done. But this is a glass half full approach. This is the part that it gets fun. So I mentioned I'm from Jamaica. We're innovators. I'm completely biased. For some reason, we thought we could have a bobsledding team. There's no snow in Jamaica. But we thought we could do it. I actually think that the industry can change, and it can't be done alone for obvious reasons, but it requires just getting out of your head and doing something totally different that nobody would think would happen. And it might even fail. The Jamaican bobsledding team learned how to bobsled and went to the Olympics. To be continued. Let me show you about the Olympics. Using this room as an example, one thing that the United States is known for is winning. And when you go to the opening ceremony or you watch it, you'll see something. All of the nations are in groups. Most of those groups look a lot alike each other. Look, let me say that again. Look like each other. So if you look at a Chinese team, you'll see mostly Chinese that look alike. You look at a Russian team, mostly look alike. The United States is one of the few that looks like the world. And it's not ironic that we usually have the most gold medals because our philosophies, our ideas, our capabilities, our failures, our ways to communicate and celebrate together creates winners. It is a formula that is so simple. When you start bringing people together, you think differently, you do things differently, and you win. And when you lose, you go back for more, and you keep winning. Well, the Jamaicans thought we could do it anyway. But what ended up happening is they were going so fast down this mountain of snow, which was nothing like the way they practiced. They used to practice by pushing cars. If you saw Cool Runnings, any of you see Cool Runnings? I'm a terrible mother. My kids were like, cool what? I was like, you know the movie about Jamaicans? They hadn't seen it. So what do? They go to YouTube. But what ended up happening is they were winning, and something went wrong, and there was an accident. and I'm again extremely biased. And instead of quitting, they picked up the bobsled and they walked to the finish line. And everybody cheered for them. They didn't get the gold medal, but they didn't quit. And they haven't stopped quitting since. Now it includes women. Now it includes people who live in Jamaica that move to Jamaica. Includes skiers who become Jamaican residents to help innovation. The Jamaican bobsledding team will continue to go until they get the gold. But just like them, even if it's hard and you fail and you're not given the prize, you'd be surprised who's watching. The world was so excited. People who didn't speak English, people who wanted to speak English, people who spoke Jamaican. That's not really a thing, we just have an accent. Everybody was so excited. There was not one person who was not excited for the team except for the people who got the gold because they were able to win. And it didn't matter who their grandparents were. It didn't matter that they were a colonized country. It didn't matter at all. Everybody was cheering for them to win. So in the end, people realize that there's a sense of pride of when you are representing something that you believe in. And as planners, we believe in creating better cities, better communities, a better future for all. And what we're doing requires innovation. It requires hard conversations. It requires losing. It requires waving a flag, different color flags, rainbow flags, black flags, blue flags. It requires doing things together. And unless we do it together, we will not succeed. So this is the really quick part that we're gonna have fun. So in Jamaica, when we see an issue, we say, no problem, man. Today you're gonna speak Jamaican. So we're gonna go through this real quick. So as I'm showing you these slides, we're gonna go through 4 ways that you can take action as soon as you leave here. Appropriately named the pacemaker. So as we go through this, start off with, I didn't know how to be authentic because I didn't know who I was, because I wasn't sure what my identity was. I wasn't sure I was doing the American dream, which is what my parents wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I was white enough, black enough, smart enough. I was so scared to switch from urban planning to architecture, and then I went to real estate, went back 30 years and realized that the developers had a lot of power. So I started doing all of these things, and I made up whatever it is that I do now, which is teach, console, consult, same thing, coach. Literally, I make it up because every organization, every city, every county is different, and we are coming up with solutions to talk about it, but nobody was listening to this conversation 5 years ago, and during COVID, I started calling people and saying, so I'm looking at your website, and I'm just noticing you're bored. You have a couple women, good job, but there's more. And they were listening because they didn't know how to use Zoom, and I did. So I taught them how to use Zoom, and next thing you know, I was talking to organizations that never would have taken my call before, and things started to change. But through all of that, a lot of things started to happen. I had to start changing my perspective, because one of the things that I did that I thought was really great was I started off with this slide, and it was a slave in a noose with lashes on their back, and I would say, black people used to be property, and now I sell property. And I thought it was a mic drop moment, and I thought I was gonna go viral. But what I didn't know is that it made the board of director chair of 20 years very angry. He was so angry that he shut down. He said, do not bring her back in here. If you bring her back in here, she's gonna cause trouble. I am not a troublemaker. But I said, can I please talk to him? And I said, what were you so angry about? He said, you made an assumption that I was racist. You made an assumption that I had my board look like this for a reason. I have tried to bring other people on this board, and it hasn't been easy. And I was turned off the minute you said that. In fact, I don't know what you said after that. And I learned people don't like to be punched in the eye and then say, I'm sorry. They also don't like to be beat up and then be nurtured after the fact and reacting to it. Just like what we saw happen with COVID. If we were proactive in different ways, which we are learning now, you can have things differently. So I learned that you have to look at things glass half full. to be optimistic. So feeling the power of joy is where we're going with this, is that this is a joyous time. This is a time to have fun, ask questions, learn, starting with your passion. Starting with your passion. The passion for just wanting to have change, even if it's not easy, even if it's not feeling good. But just have the passion to want to do it. You don't have to have all the answers. Find other people who might have answers or better room. So this is the part where you say, no problem, man. I want you to enjoy having equity as your priority. Diversity is going to happen if you create the environment that people feel welcomed. You can't just recruit and hope that it works out. You have to actually have conversations, and it takes years. Creating a committee is not enough. Creating a community takes time. That same gentleman said to me, what you don't understand about me is that I am in my 50s, or he was in his 60s. I actually marched with Martin Luther King. I think he was a little bit more woke than I was, because he actually marched with the brother. He experienced civil rights. He experienced change. He was there when they created the Fair Housing Act. I made the assumption by looking at the board that he didn't understand. The conversation we had was beautiful. Needless to say, they let me back in. And now we've developed programming that suits them as an organization, not the classes that they just took online and downloaded. We had to really get down into it. So the affirmation, this is as corny as they get, and you're gonna do it. So I'm a fan of the book Think and Grow Rich. I read it a couple times a year. And there is a section, page 72 of one of the books, where there's an affirmation, and you read it every day, and you read it every night. It's an affirmation that talks about what it is that you want to achieve. That is what I'm asking you all to do, is figure out how can you create change, how can you create equity, diversity, inclusion through actions, and talk about it to yourself in the mirror with a smile every day and make it feel good, and every night before you go to bed. If you do that every day, just like brushing your teeth, it becomes a habit, and you'll be surprised the people that show up in your life. Most of my clients have not been people of color. All of a sudden, I started changing my mindset of I wanted to help communities. I didn't want to just talk about it. And before long, I started being compassionate and asking people, what's the problem? I don't understand. So your family's leased in a housing project for 75 years? Hasn't anybody talked to you about owning? Some said yes, some said no, some thought it was too much of a burden. Some just were comfortable living there. It wasn't until I started becoming compassionate and asking people questions. I have stories after stories after stories of how many people have been attracted in my life as clients and of people who are struggling as immigrants to become homeowners, who are struggling with the covenants in their neighborhood, including within Colorado. There are 5 very wealthy neighborhoods that if you go through the title work, it still has redlining language in it. It still says white only. It's shocking. And people close deals every day in those neighborhoods. Most people aren't nerdy enough to read the title, as I. But these are the things that are happening that we don't talk about every day. And it doesn't really matter because people are going to buy the house anyways. But it does require somebody to start making a change because those small little changes make a difference. The eagerness is where I come in. I mentioned I was an angry black woman, and I joke about that because for so many years people said black women were angry. Not Jamaican women, we're happy. So I look at this as calling myself the eager black woman because you have to get eager about this. You have to get excited, you have to want to do this, especially when it's not fun, because it starts to get fun. You start to see things differently. Just imagine a couple years from now when we do that same exercise and we're all cheering and celebrating each other because we made a mission to do it together. You don't have to change policies. You do have to go where people are and don't expect them to come to you. And yes, cost is a factor. We are in a beautiful hotel. That's very expensive, far more expensive than a college degree. Whether you believed in affirmative action or not, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter. We need both in this industry. We need both to be able to make changes, to be able to have conversations, because you never know what you're gonna learn from somebody who thinks nothing like you. My neighbors that started to scrub off the letters KKK were not people of color. In fact, most of the people that showed up to the picnic were not people of color. And I thought, well, that's strange. Because the people of color thought, I don't need a picnic to find out that I'm black. And I literally said to everybody at the picnic, start calling people, get them here. Let's just have fun, because people don't realize how diverse this neighborhood is. And people started coming out, we were knocking on doors, and the next thing you know, not only did we have a ton of people, we might have kind of leaked that we were doing the celebration, and all the news channels showed up. And no longer was I the person who was playing good cop, bad cop. There was proof that my neighborhood that I lived in was extremely diverse. It wasn't a Facebook page that did it. It wasn't a vote that did it. We had always been there. We just hadn't found each other. We found each other because we made intentions to make it happen. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is no problem. The mentors I mentioned before are still in my life. I'm turning 50 in 6 weeks. And I went to my mentor, Susan Powers, and I said, so I can't really be an intern anymore. And technically, I'm an entrepreneur and a businesswoman and a self-proclaimed CEO and a consultant and a realtor, an urban planner, architect, all these things. I still have a lot of questions. We still haven't achieved the things we talked about 35 years ago. I'm on the board. The school hasn't changed. There are 12 people in the historic preservation program right now. 12. It's hard work to preserve history and culture. And the people that are at the table were there because they had a relationship with preservation before they got here. Quickly, just for a show of hands, how many of you had a mentor to get into this industry? So quite a few. I would say about a third. How many of you are a mentor? Thank you. Every day, I think about how can I give back to the community? How can I give back to someone else? Susan can't get rid of me. She can't get rid of me. I said, so here's the thing. There's a housing problem in Tallahassee where my daughter goes to school, and apparently it's still segregated, and it's 2022. Can you help me figure out affordable housing there for students just like you did here? And oh, by the way, I'm not going back to school. I'm not going to get my master's. We're just going to do this old school way. We're just going to get into it. Help me figure out the politics, the procedures, and the people that we need to connect with, because I found out that her success came from networking. The color of law blew my mind, not because I didn't understand redlining, because it was from a perspective of a man who saw what was happening, and he told a story. Now, we've had conversations. He's not an exciting speaker, but boy, does he know his stuff. And that book changed my world because I saw planning completely different. Whether you've read the book or not, look at it from a different perspective. Just like the book Think and Grow Rich. Every time I read that book, I see something different. So this is my other mentor, Dana Crawford. She just became my mentor recently. She's been my mentor for 30 years. She just didn't know about it. So finally, I had the opportunity to meet with her, and now we're working on a project because she realized this whole gentrification thing, she might be guilty of it. She has done a lot of work, and she said to me, something that a lot of people don't know is that when she started working on Larimer Square, and it was Skid Row and all these horrible things, the only people that would listen to her were the Latino community and the Black community, because they too were on the outside looking in. And so we started having conversations at the young age of 91 of what can I do differently? How can I have conversation? So we get together and we have meals and we talk about it, and it's not formalized whatsoever. But we make a lot of calls because she likes to call people and call them out. But she also can admit when she's wrong. So she became my mentor because of the power of attraction. I knew one day we would have conversations just like we're having now, because I kept on doing different things to make people mad and to make people happy, and eventually ended up being in a room like this talking about this, and I got a phone call. She said, so I'm 91, do you think it's too late to learn? Are you a coach? And I said, well, sure. And so now she's more than a mentor, she's a friend. And that's exactly the guts it takes. Because it took a lot of courage to say, I don't know what I'm doing here. So all the things that we do, Habitat to Humanity, I'm about looking forward and not looking backwards and having joy. There's a South African term called Ubuntu. It's simple. It's so simple. We all have so much in common. So now everybody please stand up, raise your hand in the air, and act like you really care. In the Black community, they jump up, we're like, hey! All right, other communities too, but we started it. I'm totally claiming that. So I want you to start raising your hands in the air, and I want you to start a clap. Clap a little faster. Yes. Thank you. You can stop. What you just experienced is momentum. It's energy. It goes through your body. It's something you feel. You cannot read about it. You cannot talk about it. It's in your bones. It's in your soul. You all have it. Some of you are a little bit off. I didn't introduce the soul clap. Anybody want to do a soul clap real quick? I didn't put the soul clap in. It is that simple. You've heard the term, if you stand for something, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Now you're all standing up. It's on you now. I cannot wait to see you next year. Bring a friend or two to work that looks nothing like you, doesn't think like you, politically is completely different than you, and bring them anyway. And now, that's when actions speak louder than words. I am so thrilled to be here, and I cannot wait to continue this journey with all of you. Thank you. So you can sit down now. That'll wake you up. So we're going to go into questions and answers real quickly. This thingy-majig, I forget what you call it. The thing. Which I was like, is there a menu? Can I get room service? He's like, go on the TV and look at the barcode thingy. And I'm like, for real? I just want French fries. $32 later, I got French fries and chicken nuggets that were dry. The reason I want you to connect with me is not what you think. What I have found is that when I start bringing people together from different counties, different organizations, and we have conversations together, that's when the work happens. It would be cute to say that I customize something for you. It's not like that at all. The work happens when we start talking together. When I'm talking to leaders and they're hearing that other leaders are struggling or having success, that's when the work happens. And the solutions happen then. It's not difficult, but it is helpful to hear from somebody. I promise you, when I have the conversation in Atlanta, it's very different than Denver. So join me as I start to put groups together. Literally, this is a movement in my mind. Building momentum happens by starting with the mindset. So as we've changed your mindset today, you cannot unsee or hear the things that you heard today. You started your day with chocolate, and now we're going to get together, have conversations, offline, online, whatever it takes to make a change. I'm going to open it for questions. Anybody have any questions? Anyone? Anyone? I've always wanted to do that. Yes. Do you mind standing, or do you want to take the mic?
Oh, cool. Thank you. I was just curious if everybody had thought about using experience in place of that degree, to offer people who might not have the opportunity to have those opportunities. So you said using experience? Yeah, like have more experience count towards being able to take the job.
So yes, I have 2 kids. So I have 2 kids, one who's anti-college and one who's in college. The one who's anti-college is like, why would you spend that much money to be stressed out all the time? When she's been going to seminars with me, she would have been here today because she had the day off, but apparently I missed one of her performances last night. We won't go there. But she's been going to seminars with me, and she knows more about urban planning than the average person does at 15 because she goes to seminars. I have her on Zoom calls with me for certification programs. I had her participate in historic preservation conference that happens, Saving Places. She is learning that way. I don't know if she'll end up going to college or not, My other daughter, on the other hand, is in college and hates all of those classes, beginning classes, but I keep reminding her, if you keep going, you're gonna learn more. I think it's a hybrid of both. What I'm doing with Sue, like I said, I'm not going back to get my master's at this point. But the work that I'm doing is literally sitting in on meetings and contributing, not just taking, but contributing, and working together to come with solutions. Because it's through these collaborations that things are happening, so I think it requires both. I will say this, particularly who are people of color or identify as being underrepresented. Credibility does matter. I was only able to make up this, whatever it is that I do, because I went through school and earned that degree. Because I served on all these boards so that I can learn what I didn't learn at school. It's through those boards that I made those connections, through those boards that I have doors open, and through the boards that I get to kick doors open and say, sorry, not sorry. But it didn't happen through school. I did not learn how to serve on a board in school-ish, through associations. But the organization, National Association of Minority Architects, left the campus when I left because it didn't occur to me that I should go back and continue that. So now 30 years later, that is something where I learned that didn't happen in textbooks. So I think you have to have, not I think, you have to have both. And it requires associations like this to have the hard conversations that you don't have at your office, in your workplace. Yes? Oh no. Sorry. No pressure there. I could probably get to him faster. Yeah, I could try. I got it. Let's see. Microphone check, 1, 2.
So as minorities, we sometimes tend to marginalize ourselves and segregate ourselves due to fear of discomfort, judgment, trust issues that have just built over the last 150 years. And I mean, growing up in a minority neighborhood, my parents told me, you don't go over there, you're gonna cause trouble. But as you said, I'm not a troublemaker. It's like your presence is gonna cause trouble, so stay over here. How can we reverse those mindsets within the segregated or marginalized communities? Because we tend to kind of just group.
We do.
Yeah, we kind of group inside ourselves and stay there.
I'm so glad you asked. So I married a man from Mississippi. My mother said, I don't care who you marry, just don't marry a black American man because they have a chip on their shoulder. So I grew up thinking black men had a chip on their shoulder. When people look at me, they just assume I'm African American. So what do? I go find a black man from Mississippi. His town is still segregated. When I came back to his town, I would have been better off being purple because I thought differently. I lived differently. I was an immigrant, all the things. His town is still that way because they want it that way. Let me be crystal clear. Some people like staying where they are and don't want to move despite our efforts. Some people have roots. Ask my Latina and Mexican brothers and sisters. They never moved. This was Mexico. They don't want to go anywhere, and they're not they. This was home. My indigenous brothers and sisters, natives of this land, just want a piece of the pie that was taken away. The efforts are not easy, and sometimes, including people who look like each other, don't even think the same way. But it's when we have multiple people who are having the conversation to talk about it that makes it different. The library that we were having that meeting in was designed by my dad, a black architect. Nobody knows that. He was partnered with Fentress, an architecture firm. They did things for years together, and I was so proud. And then my dad, now that he's in his 80s, has told the truth. He was a token black man. People won projects because he was on the consulting team, and he doesn't want credit. That's the Jamaican way, at least his generation. I want everybody to know what he's doing, not because of the building that he did, because he was purposeful, but he did not require people to say, I'm an African American architect. Most of the times, he was on these projects because they were forced to, because of programs, because of minority status, which, let's do the math. People of color, or identify as color, outnumber what we consider the majority in the United States. And in just a matter of 4 years, that number is completely gonna change. So whether we like it or not, The numbers are changing, and majority is all going to become one. The next generation won't tolerate it any other way. In saying this, I was in a room with real estate brokers, and one of the cities, I won't name it, planning department came and said, we have to really think about diversity inclusion, because at some point, we are going to have to figure out how to work with them. It didn't occur to him that what he thought was the we did not include me. I thought I was the we because I was a realtor, but the we and the them that he was talking about was just natural to say that, because normally he's in a room where he's with his people, and his people were planners. But the assumption was made that they were preparing for what is about to change when I was in the room and he was talking about me as them, and I was one of him and the us. So whether we realize it or not, sometimes it's happening unintentionally. And the conversation I had with that gentleman after was he was completely embarrassed. He was embarrassed, and he said, I am so sorry, I didn't realize. It's nothing to apologize for. Naturally, for many years, it was the we. I just happened to be over there in the corner. But so when you're in the room and you hear and see things that are happening, say something about it. Do something about it. Historically, communities, particularly of color, were supposed to be against each other. It was a divide and conquer scenario. But now that doesn't exist because it's just not tolerated anymore. Even when people try, they're outnumbered. And so even though politically, historically, things have been designed that way, we have the opportunity, the benefit, and the privilege to undo thousands of years. I couldn't have been more excited when the movie Woman King came out. If I had a mic, I would drop it right now. Because women were the original urban planners, and we finally got the credit we deserved. We were hunters and gatherers and warriors, and we gave birth to all the men that claim to be planners. But now people are reckoning history, and they're bringing out the truth, and everybody is being rewarded. So as a woman, I don't have to claim to be a queen. I too can be a king, and same is true. As kings, people are claiming to be queens. And my non-binary friends yesterday, and I'll end with this, yesterday we went over the results of the EDI survey. Did any of you take the survey? Ooh, we have some work to do. The survey was amazing, and I'm sure at some point there's a session that's following afterward that's going to talk about the results of the survey. It wasn't alarming, but when you get into the weeds, it will be. The people who felt disenfranchised were people of color, women. And somebody yesterday in the room said, so how many people checked the box that said non-binary? It was one. So there can be lots of assumptions around that. But just what I was thinking, the way he was, maybe we should talk to that one person, because there's probably somebody else out there that was non-binary, but for some reason didn't feel comfortable checking the box in this environment. So when people talk about the 1%, imagine the other 1% who's not being seen or heard or doesn't feel comfortable in our industry. All of the people matter. Their issues, their problems, their concerns, their opportunities, their solutions, and most importantly, the privilege of being able to say that you had something to do with the change in this industry. That session not only blew my mind, I knew what the results were going to be, but that was the first time I've had the conversation about non-binary in this industry. So now we have something to talk about. If that survey was not taken and that one person didn't answer that question, we wouldn't be talking about that today. Because that one person had the guts to do something, named or unnamed. But guess what? We're going to be talking about non-binary individuals in our industry as a result of it. So we have to start with the survey. So I encourage you, invite you, pleading with you, begging with you, take the survey. Because that's the only way we're going to know how to make these changes. So we can figure out how to move forward and stop looking backwards. Thank you.